Alien bodyguards betrayed alien princess. A human saved her. They were sworn to die protecting her. But when fear gripped the empire, even loyalty cracked and she was left bleeding in chains. Only a human, once her enemy, dared to care. Beneath the fractured moons of Thalkar V, the palace once gleamed like a shard of a fallen star, its spires etched in alien crystal. Its corridors guarded by warriors bred for loyalty, but now those very corridors echoed with screams not of war, but of betrayal. The alien princess, heir to a lineage as old as the stars, stumbled barefoot through the blood-slicked hallways, her ceremonial gown torn, her silver blood staining the floor in trails that glowed faintly in the dark. The bodyguards who had once sworn oaths in the sacred language of her ancestors now hunted her like prey, their faces masked, their loyalty sold to the highest bidder in the chaos following the assassination of her father, the High Regent. They came not with honor, but with shock lances and chains, not to protect but to silence. It had happened too quickly. The council chambers bombed, the throne shattered, and within moments, orders reversed and loyalties rewired like faulty AI. She had heard the first shot while sitting beneath the memory tree, a luminous organism planted at her birth, and by the time the leaves had withered into ash, her world had changed. One of her guardsjur, a veteran of 3 orbital sieges, had looked her in the eyes and whispered, "Forgive me, my princess," before striking her unconscious. When she awoke, it was not in her sanctuary, but in a cold cell carved into the underbelly of the palace's old vaults, the place where enemies of the crown had once been kept, now her tomb, and the same men who had once bowed their heads at her. Presence now stood above her with dead eyes and loaded weapons. She should have screamed, but royalty was taught to bleed silently, and so she endured until the door opened again, not with the heavy clank of a Thalkar lock, but with the hiss of an unfamiliar code. The human stepped in then, awkward, out of place, his suit patched and charred, his helmet tucked beneath one arm, his face marked by exhaustion rather than cruelty. His name was Cale Brennan, an ex-Marine from the Soul Reaches, dishonorably discharged for reasons that never made it to public files, and now working salvage contracts for whichever side paid more. He had come to Thalkar on a recovery mission, after intercepting a signal tagged to royal assets, assuming he'd find tech or relics, but instead he found her, shackled and bleeding in silence. She did not trust him. Why should she? Humans had never been allies to her kind, if anything. They had been invaders, colonists with smiles and weapons, but Cale knelt by her, not with conquest in his eyes, but a strange sorrow, as if the sight of her shattered something long buried inside him. "What did they do to you?" he asked, and for the first time since her capture, she heard a voice not tinged with venom or greed. He broke her chains with a plasma torch, his hands careful, his touch as gentle as his grimy tools allowed. When she fell forward weak from blood loss, he caught her not like a soldier catching a comrade, but like a man holding a fragile truth he didn't know he'd been searching for. They didn't speak for a long time. She didn't know if it was because she didn't trust his language or because he didn't trust his voice, but when she finally asked, "Why?" not as a queen, but as a girl broken by those sworn to protect her, Cale said, "Because they all walked away. And I've walked away from too many things I shouldn't have." The escape was messy, desperate. He carried her through tunnels meant for dead diplomats, avoided patrols with sensor jammers stolen from old wrecks, and when they surfaced into the dust-choked air of the ruined gardens, her palace burning behind them like the bones of a fallen god, she didn't cry. She was too hollow for that. Cale didn't speak much either, except to say they needed to find a ship, fast. He had one stashed far beyond the city perimeter, hidden beneath a collapsed observatory. It wasn't much, just a patchwork freighter, held together by bad welds and stubborn hope, but it flew, and that was enough. They moved through back alleys and service shafts, him watching every shadow with a soldier's paranoia, her barely able to stand, relying on him more than pride would ever admit. At one point, she stopped and pressed her palm against a wall etched with the sigil of her house, a sigil that would soon mean nothing, and whispered something in her native tongue that Cale couldn't translate, but the pain in her voice didn't need words. "We're almost there," he told her, not knowing if he was lying. And somehow, despite the orbital patrols and trader drones, they made it. The ship's hatch hissed open like a sigh of salvation, and as Kale helped her inside, alarms echoed. In the distance, signaling that someone, somewhere, had discovered what was missing from the vault, not treasure, not a weapon, but a living legacy. As the ship lifted from the scorched surface, carrying with it a wounded princess and the human who refused to let her die, the skies above Thalkar cracked with lightning and orbital fire. She sat in silence as Kale piloted through the chaos, her fingers clutching the edge of her seat, her mind cycling between grief and numb disbelief. "What will you do now?" he asked when they reached the edge of the system, his voice raw with the weight of consequences. She didn't answer right away. She just stared at her reflection in the control panel, skin dulled, eyes once radiant now dimmed, but alive. Finally she said, "Survive and remember who didn't run." Kale looked at her, this alien royal once caged by her own kind, and nodded. "Then I'll stay," he said, "until you're safe. Or until I'm not." And in that moment, though, the stars outside were cold and unwelcoming. The air in the ship seemed just a little warmer, as if the universe itself had paused to acknowledge that even in betrayal, loyalty could still be born. The stolen transport groaned as it slipped into sublite, systems barely stitched together by emergency code patches and rewired ducts that should have failed hours ago. But Karen had coaxed worse to fly. This ship didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to keep them moving. The stars outside smeared into dull trails, and beside him the alien princess sat motionless, wrapped in a scavenged thermal cloak, her silver hair tangled across her shoulders, her gaze fixed not on the viewport, but on something far more distant memory, perhaps. She hadn't spoken since they launched, not really, a few nods. A faint thank you whispered when he handed her nutrient paste. But mostly, she remained quiet, as if still unsure whether freedom was real or just another hallucination stitched together by trauma. Karen didn't push her. He didn't ask about the palace, the betrayal, the guards who turned on her. He knew what that kind of hurt felt like. Sometimes silence was a better salve than any words, but silence didn't stop the danger from closing in. By the third day, their stolen jump signatures had been flagged by Border Patrol AI across 2 systems. Karen rerouted through old mining channels, burned false IDs bought during the war, and landed them in the gravity well of a derelict station orbiting a forgotten dwarf star. No one would find them here, not yet. It was cold, dark, the only light coming from flickering bulbs and cracked ceiling panels that hummed with the slow, dying heartbeat of failing generators. But it was safe for now? Lyrian followed him wordlessly as he scavenged through crates for salvageable food, insulation fabric, anything to hold them over. She never asked what came next. Maybe she didn't believe there was a next. Maybe the last time she planned for tomorrow, her whole world collapsed. It wasn't until the 6th night, with Karen asleep beside the emergency heater, that she finally spoke, voice thin, melodic beneath layers of caution. "You should have left me." The words were simple, not accusatory, just tired. Chiron opened his eyes but didn't look at her directly. "Maybe," he said softly, "but I didn't." Lyrian was silent a moment longer, then added, "I was supposed to die with them. That's what royalty does." Chiron sat up, brushing ash from his sleeves. "Then they broke the script, not you." She finally turned to face him, her violet eyes gleaming in the dimness, her expression unreadable. "You don't understand, human. My existence, my body. It was part of a treaty. The Ilari protectors, the genetic seals, the ceremonies, I was peace, or at least the illusion of it. And when they turned on me, it wasn't just betrayal. It was the end of something sacred." Karen didn't flinch. "Sounds to me like peace built on using someone like an artifact wasn't peace at all." Her expression shifted just slightly, but he saw it, the beginning of recognition. Maybe even the hint of anger, not at him, but at the truth she hadn't let herself speak until now. That night, she didn't sleep in the corner. She curled beside the heater near him, not touching, but not hiding either. The walls of that station weren't thick enough to keep the past out, but maybe they were thick enough to give her space to face it. Over the next week, she began to move differently. Not faster, her injuries were still healing, but with more intent. She helped him sort power cells, listened as he explained the backup fuel mix. One night, when the solar array shorted and the station plunged into complete darkness, it was Lyrian who found the emergency lantern and fixed the fuse. "I was taught court poetry," she said dryly as she handed it to him, "but they also trained us in systems repair, in case of diplomatic emergencies. Apparently betrayal qualifies." Karen grinned, the first genuine smile in weeks. "Well, Your Highness, you've just been promoted to chief engineer." She rolled her eyes, but the moment felt warm, human. The illusion didn't last. By the 10th day, a drone pinged station perimeter stealth class, Navy grade, unregistered. That meant only one thing: mercenaries. Someone wanted her back, and they weren't using official channels. Karen rushed to the console, fingers flying across keys, locking doors, muting heat signatures, rerouting vent emissions. He knew the drill, but Lyrian didn't panic. She stood behind him, watching the screen, jaw set. "They're not here to capture me," she said. "They're here to erase me." Karen looked at her. "Then we leave. We don't have the fuel." He exhaled sharply. She was right. Even with jury-rigged cells, their range wouldn't outrun a stealth class. "Pursuit. We can hide," he offered, but she shook her head. "They'll scour the hull, scan for DNA markers. No place to run." Then she turned, eyes calm. "There's an Alari distress beacon on this station. Deep buried, probably still functional. I felt its signal. They used to be paired with Royal. ID codes if I activate it. It will ping the nearest Alari loyalist ship, if any still exist. Or it could alert the ones who want you dead," Chiron countered. "I know." She moved toward the access ladder without waiting. He followed. The beacon was buried beneath layers of rusted corridors, far older than the station itself. They pried it open, coughing through dust and static. Karen powered it with a salvage converter while Lyrian keyed in a sequence from memory trembling, fingers tapping symbols that hadn't been spoken aloud since the day her throne fell. The beacon pulsed once, then again, then held steady. Somewhere in the void, it screamed her name. After that, they waited. 2 days, no response. But on the third morning, the Array pinged back a code, encrypted in royal dialect. Lyrian paled. "It's from the Varellan, the last loyalist cruiser." "They received it. Is that good or bad?" Karen asked, narrowing his eyes. She hesitated. "If it's truly them, ... The ship arrived hours later, uncloaking. In a slow, deliberate arc. Sleek, wounded from battle, but still majestic. Bearing the sigil of the first house, Lyrian stood straighter when she saw it, like something old and regal flickered back to life inside her. But her fingers brushed Karen's wrist as if to say, "Don't leave." The Varellan's boarding crew was small Alari warriors in ceremonial armor, weapons sheathed, expressions grim. Their commander removed his helmet slowly. "Princess Lyrian," he said with a bow, "we failed you." She didn't answer. Just stared at them, then said, "This human saved me. If you mean to restore my name, he comes with us." The commander glanced at Chiron. "He's not Alari." "No," she said. "He's better. They took them aboard." Medical bays hummed. Lyrian disappeared behind privacy screens, tended to by biosurgeons and memory stabilization experts. Karen stood awkwardly in a holding chamber, unsure if he was now guest, prisoner, or relic. Eventually Lyrian reemerged, cloaked and regal. Whites, hair restored, eyes sharp. She looked taller, stronger, but she walked straight to him. "You don't have to stay," she said softly. "You gave me back more than freedom. You gave me choice. That's enough." He looked at her, saw the fire in her again, the power that once ruled councils and silenced warlords. But all he said was, "Wherever you go, someone's going to try to hurt you again. You'll need someone who sees through lies." She smiled, then truly smiled, and it lit the sterile corridor more than any lamp. "Then stay," she whispered. "Not as a servant, as an equal." as the only soul who didn't leave when I was already broken. And as the Varellans surged back into the stars, carrying them toward uncertain futures, toward empires and enemies and the long road of healing, Karen knew one thing with absolute clarity. He hadn't just saved a princess. He'd witnessed a fallen star rise again, and this time she would burn on her own terms. The fortress burned in the background like a falling star, illuminating the night sky above the jagged cliffs of Varellan Prime, and as Rin stared at the blazing horizon, her silver skin streaked with dried blood and ash, she could no longer tell if her heart was breaking from grief, relief, or something deeper, something she had no name for until her trembling fingers found Callan's hand. In the darkness, anchoring her to a world that had once tried to kill her. They had come for her again, not soldiers this time, but zealots loyal to the old bloodlines, those who believed she was a liability, a ghost of a fallen monarchy that threatened to inspire rebellion just by surviving. And even though she had fled their world, even though she had renounced her claim to the crystal throne, they hunted her across systems, her own bodyguards once first among them, now turned into assassins by promises of amnesty or reward soaked in royal betrayal. The air still smelled of scorched metal and ozone. The final drone ambush barely a memory, but Callan, his arm wrapped around her waist, blood running from a gash across his jaw, stood steady, shielding her from the chill as the shuttles' silhouette finally cut through the smoke above, descending like salvation from the stars. The fight had been savage. Callan had been forced to kill again, not because he wanted to, but because the universe left no room for mercy when protecting someone no one else would save. Rin had seen it in his eyes, that human ache, that horror at what he'd done, but she also saw the resolve that made her trust him more than anyone who shared her blood. When the firefight began near the old observatory and her former guards cornered them with shock lances drawn, it had been Callan who stepped in front of her, teeth gritted, voice low, daring them to try. He didn't speak their language, not fluently, but his stance said everything. You'll go through me first. She remembered the first time she saw him back in the prison labs. Just another technician cleaning up alien filth while the Empire decided who was worth dissecting and who was simply forgotten. He hadn't spoken to her then, but he looked at her like she was real, not a relic. Not a threat, but someone who didn't deserve chains. It wasn't grand, it wasn't romantic at first, but it had been the only real kindness in a world of needles and silence. And now here they were, standing on the edge of the only chance they had left, her head pressed weakly against his shoulder as the engines of the incoming shuttle washed over them like wind. She had nothing left but him. Her people had exiled her, her protectors had betrayed her, and even the rebel splinter cells across the outer moons wanted her memory erased so no civil war could rise again. But Callan had chosen her without any duty, without any blood oath, without any reason other than the one that mattered. He couldn't watch her die. He'd said those words under his breath the night before, when they were holed up in the collapsed tunnels beneath the mining ruins. His voice cracked and low as he stitched her side with trembling fingers. I can't let you die. Not because she was royalty, not because she was beautiful, but because she was alive and alone and hurting, and that was reason enough. The shuttle landed hard on the cliff platform, a blast of light painting their shadows across the rock. The pilot, a smuggler Callan had bribed with almost everything he had left, signaled them frantically, and as they climbed aboard, Rin stumbled, knees weak, but Callan caught her instantly, lifting her into the hold as if she weighed nothing. Holding her so tightly her pain briefly faded. The doors sealed with a hiss. The ship rose, shuddering through the atmosphere, and Rin didn't look back at the burning fortress. She didn't need to. That part of her life was over, not because it had been finished, but because someone had given her a new beginning. Hours passed in silence, Callan checking her wounds, wrapping her hand in his, refusing to sleep until her breathing steadied. She woke later to find him slumped beside her, exhausted but peaceful, and for the first time since the palace crumbled. Beneath betrayal she felt safe. She reached out, brushed his cheek with fragile fingers, and whispered the words no translator could misinterpret. You were my only rescue. He didn't wake, but he smiled faintly in his sleep. The stars beyond the viewport glittered like scattered tears across the black. And somewhere in that endless dark, a new life waited, one where no one would know her name, where titles didn't matter, and where maybe, just maybe, she could finally be free. And as the shuttle carried them away from war, betrayal, and blood-soaked memory, the alien princess rested her head against the human's shoulder and closed her eyes, not in fear, not in grief, but in peace, knowing this time she was not alone.